Welcome back. As we build up to the 1st of November local government elections, political parties have promised to address the abuse of women in a society where gender-based violence is alarmingly high. Many have also put forward women as their candidates for election to various positions. But has gender played a major role in this year's campaigning? Political science professor Amanda Gouws joins us live now to talk about that very issue. Prof, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for being on News at Prime. So I've just outlined the core promises from parties as far as gender. They talk about the protection of women, dealing with perpetrators of gender-based violence, and they've nominated or put forward women to take up positions post the elections. But has gender been addressed adequately?
Well, I think we need to take a step back and just ask, how do women get into local government? And, you know, we have a ward and a PR list system. So parties are supposed to have a quota system to get at least 50% women candidates into local government so that women can also actually be part of decision making. But only the ANC has a voluntary party quota. So where women campaign directly with men in wards, they don't fare very well. So we've never had more than 33% women elected in wards. And it's a bit higher for the PR list, but it's still difficult for women to get into government.
Why
now,
is
if we
that
talk about, because, you know, not all parties have a quota system, so it brings the average down. But also when women campaign directly with men in the ward system, they don't actually win. And the reason for that is that both men and women believe that men make better political leaders. I mean, there's been a lot of research on that, and I've myself done a study in 2018 on cultural beliefs around political issues. And this is one of the things, that both men and women believe that men make better political leaders. So also when women get into local government, it's very often difficult because they're not taken seriously. They're very often sexually harassed when they're there, or they are expected to join a faction. So it's very difficult in many ways for women to make a breakthrough in terms of being able to make inputs into policy making. And why this is so important is because local government is the closest to the people in terms of service delivery. So we know all the issues around the lack of service delivery. And if we look at, for example, service delivery boycotts and protests, then we see it's very often women who head these protests, because it's women that get disproportionately affected if you don't have water, if you don't have electricity, you know, if you have sewage problems, because women are the primary caregivers. They take care of households, they take care of children, and so on. So local government is really very important to women. But if we, for example, look at the party platforms, no party actually speaks directly to local issues. Mm-hmm. We've seen, I think the manifesto of the EFF is quite interesting in that regard, because they speak to gender issues, but they say they will economically empower women, they will stop gender-based violence, and so on. Those are issues that are actually, they've also had in their national election platform. So how is it going to translate to the local level? And there's not a single party that actually tells people what they're going to do for women on a service delivery basis or that dimension of service delivery.
How then do we change that, Professor Gouws, the attitudes towards women in leadership?
Well, I think that, you know, parties have to start to realize that 58% of the voting population are women. In the Western Cape, 300,000 more women, and they are young women, have actually registered to vote. So women is a really important constituency. And it's time for political parties and party leadership to start thinking about the fact that voters are not a homogeneous group, right? You have different age categories, and you have men and women, and you have younger and older people. So you know, it's also about changing cultural attitudes towards women's leadership. And I think this can only change if you see more women in leadership positions. And this is the problem, that you don't see enough on the local government level anyway, women in leadership positions. And so it's about changing cultural attitudes. But it's also, in a sense, I think that it's local government is very fraught for women at the moment because it's so dysfunctional. And then we see the violent threats. People get assassinated. Three women that were actually having a meeting were shot dead in front of the meeting, and that was around the local government election. So women look at this and they ask themselves, is it worth it? Many women have children. Is it worth for them to actually get involved in this type of violence against candidates? So also the territory is not a good territory for women. So we need all these issues.
And just on what you were saying, Prof, about how there aren't enough women in politics, at least currently, and how the performance of women politicians is assessed, do you think that women are judged differently, more harshly, in fact, in positions of political leadership? Because let's face it, even in the worst case scenario as far as governance, corruption allegations and the rest of it, that is a space dominated by men, yet still there's still more confidence in male leadership for public office.
Yes, but I also think where women build a track record, there are many constituencies where you have women who actually do good service delivery. So they build a track record, and I think they actually then also get re-elected. But the territory has to make it possible for women to build that track record. And I think in very dysfunctional municipalities where people get deployed, right? They get deployed to work in that municipality. They come with a very bad record. They undermine actually all the other candidates that are trying to do good work. So factional infighting is really, and it's a problem on national level, provincial level, and local level. Until we manage to actually depoliticize service delivery, because the problem here is that you're supposed to have politicians, and then you have people who need to do the service delivery. And those officials that do the service delivery should not be politicized. But everything in South Africa is incredibly politicized. And that means that you don't have that non-partisan service delivery. What happens on top of that is that local governments buy in consultants to do a lot of the work, which means that there's no accountability. What consultant can be held accountable? So the issue of accountability and the failure of accountability is, I think, also a serious problem.
And just on that point, perhaps different from the issues around women, this is the second last weekend that political parties have to campaign in South Africa before we vote on November 1st. How much of people's choices have already been made up at this stage? I'm wondering if the campaigning and manifestos actually make a difference, or if people just vote the way they voted in previous elections, or make up their minds either way, despite what's promised.
I think what we're going to see in this election is that people are really fed up with bad service delivery. They're fed up with parties. So you're going to see a low turnout. It may actually be the lowest turnout we've ever had in a local government election. And people who think strategically about local government, who do not vote on party loyalty, they may vote for independence. So you're going to see a shift towards coalition governments, because you will have independents, you will have parties that didn't get 50%, and they have to go into coalition governments. And then what we may see is a paralysis of service delivery because parties cannot work with each other. So that's, I think, another really serious concern we need to think about before we go to vote. How do we vote? Because we now need to start to think strategically about voting. If you keep on voting for the same party that gives you bad service delivery, you're going to just get more of the same. And my fear is that people are just not going to vote. And then, it affects the legitimacy of your government, because if you have a low turnout, it means that more people do not vote than people who vote. So how legitimate is that government?
Professor Amanda Gouws, political science professor, speaking to us tonight about gender and the local government elections. Grateful for your time, ma'am. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Let's move on.